Hello chess friends and welcome to Zarov's chess channel and welcome to the Tata Steel Masters tournament in 2021. We are now in the round 9 and we're beginning this round with the redemption path by Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen didn't play so far a good tournament. He had only one win and only one loss, but many draws he played so far. He's not in top shape and it's really time to make something happen. He played now with the white pieces against Nils Grandelius, and I think this round was really one of the wildest rounds so far in the tournament, and be prepared. I'm going to cover also some other games, but we're starting now the round 9 with this game. So here Magnus opened with the move e4. Grandelius response with c5, knight to f3, d6, we have d4 so far, the Sicilian. After c takes d4, knight to d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, and a6, we have the Najdorf on the board. And I think in this tournament the Najdorf has been played outplayed so many times. The Najdorf is not a good opening in this tournament. Magnus Carlsen also lost his game against Esipenko in the Najdorf, so the Najdorf is out of shape. I'm not sure why, but I really love to see the Najdorf also from black perspective, but still without success so far in this tournament. So queen to d3. Here Magnus plays a very calm line. First of all, he cements his queen with the move queen to d3, but there is a really wild idea about this move queen to d3. The queen is always flexible on the third rank. Most of the times against the Najdorf we play something like f3, queen to e3, and then queen to d2 and similar stuff, trying to queenside castle, and the game will be really dynamic on both sides of the board. But here Magnus plays a compact line more towards the center. In the game we have e6, chevening setup by Grandelius. The flexibility is very important here to know this by black. Black is always trying to maybe to create a d5 pawn breakthrough, or maybe here b5 pawn breakthroughs. Here Magnus plays a4, which basically is showing the cards now that Magnus is not going to castle anymore on the queen side, because he has exposed himself a little bit with the move a4. If you castle too early on the queen side, then b5 is a possibility. If you could just imagine the position, if white castles now on the queen side, then b5 could be a possibility, even to sacrifice a pawn, but then the a file could get opened and you could have serious troubles. But here Magnus really chose the positional setup against a Najdorf. I think Magnus is a much better positional player than a tactical player. That's why his choice here was very pragmatic to play the move a4. Here after the move knight to c6, we have knight takes c6, and this is now a tricky line by Magnus, because after b takes c6 we have now queen to g3. And you may think this move d5 is perfectly fine, because after e takes d5 we would then have c takes d5, and black would continue with the powerful pawn central control, which is also very good. But the problem is now Magnus doesn't have to react. He can play simply bishop to d3, and that's why, although black has gained here the pawn central control so far, it's not such a good line, I think, here for black, because after something like bishop to e7 castling, then maybe black can castle also here on the king side, then you're always vulnerable to this idea of the move e5, and then if the knight gets deflected here maybe to d7, if you could just imagine, let's see possible continuation, maybe here after bishop to e7 castling, then you see e5 would be very tricky. After knight to d7, both of these bishops are aiming here. There are even some queen to h3 ideas, f4 f5 ideas are also possible. So that's why here d5 is not such a great choice here in the game. Bishop to b7 played by Grandelius, and here bishop to e2 by Magnus. We have bishop to e7, and now bishop to f4, which is also a natural idea. We're attacking simply the d6 weakness in the game. e5 played by Grandelius, and we have now bishop to e3. Here is a new problem of blacks again. d5 you would love to play, of course, you would love to connect these two pawns somehow here on the d file and e file. So far it's not a possibility because the e5 pawn is weak, but Grandelius will find, I think, a great way how to make these pawns mobile, because you have the advantage in the center when it comes to pawns, but you have to prepare this d5 move further. And here Grandelius played first castling king to h8. First of all, we're preparing also the move f5. You're getting with your king out of the potential range of the light square bishop. f5 is now the preparation here by Grandelius. We have a5 by Magnus, also pragmatic idea. We're fixing now the queen side. Nothing can happen now on the queen side. We can also play maybe a dangerous attack against the queen, but so far it doesn't bring you so much to move bishop to b6. So that's why here after move knight to d7 we have now rook to d1. Very important move now by Magnus Magnus Carlsen to get the rook and the same file like the queen. If something gets opened, then the queen could be endangered, and now comes this move f5. Threatening, of course, f4. It seems so that something went wrong here for Magnus Carlsen, but so far it's a great game by Grandelius too. He played really an outstanding opening line so far. E takes f5, and now he gets his pawn central control. He gets his pawn majority. But again, I'm pointing out many times we're preparing this move d5, but it's very risky because there is really a wild line. Magnus missed it, unfortunately. The move knight to a4, Magnus Carlsen here played, but there is really a great line with the move queen to h3. And now if you try d4, there is also a great move here, knight to e4. If you take, we have here d takes e3, then you get f6, and f6 is really dangerous. You see we have now a double attack. The knight is attacked twice, the bishop is attacked. In the best line, black can try e takes f2, knight to f2. You can maybe take now bishop to f6, but now you get rook to d7, and this is now a much better position, I think, for white, because here we can play always a blockade around the square e4, and what we can notice now that there are two isolated pawns, and there could be really long-term weaknesses. Instead of maybe bishop to f6, you could try maybe bishop to c8 in order to protect the knight, but again, simply f takes e7 could happen, queen to e7, and again we could try maybe something like bishop to g4, pinning the knight first. Again, try our blockade idea with knight to e4, and then maybe get our rook here also on a very active square. Again, I'm pointing out in this particular line there are two isolated pawns, so this would be much better here for Magnus Carlsen, but unfortunately he didn't see this line. Knight to a4 he played. Here we have d4, bishop to d2, we have now c5. You see the pawn storm is coming. What we're trying to do is again to connect the pawns here on the fourth rank. Then the pieces of whites are really kicked away, are really pushed away by the pawns, and Magnus played now queen to h3, protecting first his pawn. We have bishop to g5, bishop takes g5, queen to g5, which is also a great idea here by Grandelius. He gets rid basically of his bad bishop. His bishop is a little bit blocked out by this central pawn chain, so that's why this dark square bishop is not so important. He trades off basically his bad piece for a good piece of Magnus Carlsen's. Bishop takes g5, queen to g5, and now the queen comes also very actively into the game. The pawn is attacked. So far, really great game now by Nils Grandelius. Magnus missed his probably winning chances in the middle of the game, but now it's an equal game for both sides. Rook to e1, we have bishop to e4. Probably a better way here is to continue with the move e4. You have to connect finally your pawns. You have to create really dynamics now in the center. I don't think that this pawn is a problem here for black. This pawn can be taken afterwards. We can maybe include our bishop into the attack, but it's really time to get somehow maybe our knight into the game and maybe threatening even some knight to f3 ideas. This would be very cool. Of course, first your pawn is hanging on c5, but as an attacking idea, maybe something like rook to c8. We first have to regroup, of course, but I think knight to e4, knight to f3 would be really a wild continuation here for black. Still here in this position, black slightly better because Magnus missed this opportunity. But after the move rook to e1, Nils Grandelius played a more passive move. It seems that it's more active, but the bishop to e4 leads now into simplified line for Magnus. Bishop to d3, we have bishop to f5, bishop takes f5. Now more pieces are traded off, and now Magnus finds a great way how to open the a file. Knight to b6, we have knight takes b6, a takes b6, and now h6. Here Nils Grandelius is creating some breathing spaces, and now queen to d3 played by Magnus Carlsen. He stops the potential e4 progress by black and also the potential c4 progress. That's the most important thing. Never allow these pawns to get advanced on the fourth rank. Also, as I said, Nils Grandelius had his chances. He missed also his chances to get some kind of an activity in the center. Now Nils, after many moves, makes really his first blunder. Rook to b8 is not good because Magnus played simply rook takes a6, and he grabs now pawn. There are maybe better lines. Rook to f8 is here much better. It forces now Magnus to play a passive move. You have to counter attack. This pawn is weak anyway. It's not the point that we want to protect this pawn. Maybe Magnus could here after rook to f6 play b7, it's not a problem. But now when we take out this pawn, still Magnus has also some worries here around the square f2, and also some worries with some queen to f5 ideas and then e4 ideas here for black. But rook to b8, huge blunder. It seems so that still the game is equal, but you know Magnus, when he gets an advantage in an endgame, then he doesn't lose it. Here he plays simply rook takes a6, we have rook to f6, g3, creating also some spaces for the king. Now after trades of rooks, we have now f4. Great move by Magnus Carlsen, because if you take e takes f4, you get checkmated here. Really great tactical sequence that Magnus saw now in the endgame. After a move f4, here Magnus has the opportunity to grab now this pawn. After rook takes b2, we have now also the opportunity to take out this pawn. Rook to c5. This pawn is a weakness. You have some backrack problems. You see there are also some checkmate threats. The queen is covering here the h7 square. Also, of course, Magnus Carlsen's king is also endangered. It's not the point about that, but Magnus can always escape here, maybe to h3, h4 is even possibility to hide with our king. Black's king is much more vulnerable to white's attacks. Queen to a8 here, king to f2. Magnus improves the position of his king. We have rook to b8 and now queen to f3. A pragmatic choice again by Magnus. You know how Magnus loves to undermine the pressure. Now after potential trades of queens, our king is much more closer to the center of the board, then also we can attack here the weak d4 pawn. So queen to a7, Magnus now centralizes the queen. The centralization idea of your pieces is very important in an endgame, and it's very important to play actively with your king. The king shouldn't be treated now something that you have to defend. Of course, you have to calculate some tactics. You have to see if you're getting checkmated by the queen and the rook, but I think white's pieces are much more active. They're more centralized. They're creating many more attacking possibilities, and still the king can play. The king can be included really into the attack. You see now how Magnus will do it. Queen to a1 here, queen to e5, queen to b2, and now comes a very important move, rook to c6. We're threatening the move rook takes h6 because you cannot take because of the pin by the queen against the king. So king to h7, we have rook to c7. We're threatening checkmate on g7, rook to g8, a forced move, and now king to g2. You see Magnus is now trying to get his king into the attack. We have queen to b4, queen to e4, attacking the king, king to g8, and now rook to d7. There are maybe many lines there that are suggested by the engine, but here basically every move for Magnus Carlsen is good. He can attack this weakness, the weak d4 pawn. He can include his king into the game. There are really, as I said, many better moves when it comes to engine calculations, but here Magnus plays really decent endgame. He doesn't want to complicate things. He doesn't want to risk. He has now a winning endgame. Queen to d2, king to h3, queen to d1, and now rook to e7. Again, maybe rook to d4 is also a possibility to take out the pawn, but here Magnus again keeps his pieces glued together. He wants to have the connection always between the queen and the rook. We have queen to h5, not a problem. You don't have perpetuals, that's the most important thing. And Nils Grandelius prepared here now the move rook to c8 with the idea queen to d1 and taking out this pawn. But Magnus plays now simply f5. That's the best move. What he wants to do is split the pawn structure here with the move f6. Then when the king doesn't have so many good protective pieces in front of him, then the queen and the rook could also again create some new attacking possibilities. In the game we have this move queen to d1, but it's not the problem because Magnus now trades off the queens, trade off the rooks, rook to e8, rook to e8, queen to e8, king to h7, and now queen to e4 with preparations to play the move f6, creating a discovered attack and simply push this pawn further. So that's why king to h8, we have queen to e8, here queen to g6 by Magnus, king to h8, and now f6, very important move, and again check by Grandelius. And this move queen to g6 was very important because we're protecting, of course, still our pawn on c2. Very nice moves here by Magnus Carlsen. King to h3, queen to e6, and now king to h4. This king can simply march on. If you try here queen to f6 to trade off the pieces, it's not so good because you running into an endgame which is basically winning for white. After the move h5, we have a great move h4, and the most important thing of here after king to f7 is the move g4, because after h takes g4, king to g4, we have now the distant pass pawn, and this pawn will always be deflected. We can move our king towards the center, and now when we take out this pawn, Magnus will simply take out this pawn on f6, and his king is much closer to this pawn, so the king will be too far away from the action. So that's the distant pass pawn strategy in endgame. So that's why here after the move king to h4, queen takes f6 is not a possibility here. G takes f6 played by Nils Grandelius, and Magnus can now take this pawn. Great endgame technique, and again by the world champion. We have a new check, queen to g6, king to f8, we have g4. You may think that king to h5 is a great move because you're moving your king towards the other side of the board, but then you get queen to h3. This could be also a nice possibility to get checkmated because you blundered really in one move. So that's why Magnus plays here really calm game. g4, he plays now basically the best engine moves. g4. There is one problem. If you try here king to e7 with the preparation after potential king to h5, if you think that this move works, you're wrong. Maybe queen to e5 is a possibility, but you have troubles after king to h6. Queen takes h2 is a possibility, but you get then king to g7, and this is now again completely winning here for Magnus Carlsen, because you have to protect your e5 pawn, but then you get queen to f7, king to d6, and again we're trading off the queens, and we're going into a favorable endgame where we have this extra pawn. So that's why queen to e5 instead of king to e7 here played by Grandelius, and now Magnus plays h3, again a calm move, king to e7, queen to f5, forcing the trades of queens, but of course Nils Grandelius is not interested in trading off the queens, because when the queens are off the board, then Magnus has this extra pawn, and again it's completely winning. Queen to e3, king to h5, here again Magnus found a similar strategy because he can hide with his king to g6, and no perpetuals are possible here. Nils Grandelius tried the move king to d6. Even if you try something else, maybe something like queen to h4, then we have queen to e4. We can grab now this pawn. No perpetuals again are possible. So pardon me, here it's not a possibility. Here we can again try queen to f5. Because if you take the pawn, then you risk this again checkmate into queen to g5, and it would be game over. You have king to h7 and queen to g7. So it's not so easy. That's why here after the move king to g6, Nils Grandelius tried king to d6, but Magnus can take out now this pawn. Queen to h6 doesn't work for you because we have simply king to f7. No checks again are possible. Then again we're threatening simply to trade off the queens. After the move king to f6, Nils tried queen to e3. Magnus simply pushed the pawn to g5. You have one check, it's not a problem. Again, a new check, king to g7, but no checks are possible anymore. If you try to do some perpetuals, then we're again forcing a trade of queens and going into this endgame where we have this extra pawn. Queen to e7, again king to g8, queen to e8, and now king to pardon me, here after the move king to g8 in this position, Nils Grandelius resigned. If you try here queen to e8, again a new check, then that was the whole point here. Queen to f8 will happen. Again you have to trade off the queens, and now g6, g7, g8, the promotion to queen, and it's a completely winning endgame here for Magnus Carlsen. So okay, great game. I think in the Najdorf, Magnus played here really an outstanding game, a calm game. He really needed this win in order to make something happen in the tournament. Still, he has to play against Fabiano Caruana in this tournament, and Alireza Firouzja was the leader before this round, has also to play against Fabiano Caruana. Caruana is playing also great. We're covering also his game in the continuation of our day today, and be prepared. Really wild things happened in the tournament. Also, we have the clash of the prodigies, Alireza Firouzja against Esipenko. Really also a wild game. We have also the game Anish Giri versus Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, also an outstanding game from both sides. Be prepared. This was really one of the wildest days of this tournament. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my coverage of this tournament so far. Here's the link. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.